Greetings, podcast powerhouses. Welcome to the Marvelous TV Club, a podcast tackling our collective obsession with the latest releases from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And right now, that means we're talking about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, looking back on Episode 5 and the questions it raises. Every week, we analyze the newest chapter of the MCU from 3 unique angles you will only find on this podcast. Our storycast this week got into the themes of the small acts of heroism and how they often mean more to the world than the supposed big stuff, as well as the importance of self-determinism, but also the difficulty of achieving it. On CharacterCast, Christine talks really beautifully about what Isaiah Bradley's story meant to her the first time she watched it, and we also explore Sam and Bucky's growth, the very urgent need for a Bucky and Sarah Summer, who deserves the blame for John Walker's monstrosity, and so much more. But now, it is time for the one and only PonderVision. This show looks both forward and back, inside the Falcon and Winter Soldier and beyond it, because the questions that arise from Episode 5 can extend far beyond the limits of the episode itself. I am your host, Marc Faletti, and as always, I'm joined by the person I would want most on my side if I'm taking the GRC to court, Jesse Taylor. Hey, Jesse.
Mark, I always love your intros. And also, if She-Hulk needs a consulting attorney, I'm up for it.
Yeah, I mean, when we get into the She-Hulk, I feel like the legal stuff, it's just going to be off the chain to talk to you and Christine about all that stuff.
It's going to be amazing.
So I kind of feel like this episode would rank in the top 10 MCU releases, even on its own. Am I overrating how good this episode was?
No, I think you're exactly right. Part of it was because it did what you want to see in any sort of multi-character show like this, which is to bring together a lot of plot lines without feeling like it was done cheaply. The only odd thing about this episode, and it's not odd bad necessarily, but when I was watching it, did it feel like a finale to you?
Yes. It's hard to believe there's more to come.
Yeah, it felt like they were setting up for the second season of Falcon and Winter Soldier instead of it being the 5th of 6 episodes.
The other thing is, a lot of times when you see showrunners out in media and press and they're talking about an episode and swearing to you that something is coming that's going to answer all your questions, it's usually because they're worried it didn't work. And so they're out there and they're trying to raise this concept in people's minds to hopefully like hold things together. So the fact that Malcolm Spellman had been out there talking about Episode 5 and Nate Moore, one of the producers, had been out there talking about Episode 5, I was a tiny bit nervous that maybe they were just hinging too much on this and that the hope was maybe a little unjustified. But instead, it was way more amazing than I could have expected, and such a perfect reason to do these TV shows, because this kind of character development is impossible in a 2-hour movie.
Right. And if you think about it, you take all the story beats of this show and you cram them into a 2-hour movie. And so I think you get very little of Sarah, which, as we saw this episode, would be a travesty. You probably, I would think, get rid of the Wakandans entirely. Mm-hmm. Again, and as you talk about it, you think, so what are we getting rid of? All the stuff with the black women in it.
Right.
And it would ultimately just be kind of a more paint-by-numbers movie about Sam and Bucky fighting the Flag Smashers and John Walker and Zemo.
Maybe a little Zemo. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then you probably just have a big scene where everything blows up and then they come out of it during the hero walk, and then maybe they have their little talk by the trees that they have in this episode, and then they walk off, and then you wait for Falcon and Winter Soldier 2 or
in like 4.5 years or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you think they're relegating the stories of black characters to television? Do you think the movies are still going to remain like the space for white characters to have all the fun?
Well, I think part of it is you look at who's left alive in the universe, and you have to have the stories of more black characters and more women, or else you don't really have stories.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. We have our 3 areas of questions we're going to get into tonight. The most entertaining questions we have, because it's just really fun to start off with those and have a really good time up top. Then we're going to get into some meta questions about making of the show and the production process, and some behind-the-scenes questions that tie into what happened on screen too, of course. And then we'll get into our uncomfortable questions. I'm very excited about all of this, Jesse. So let's start with our most entertaining questions. Do you have one for me?
I do. So I'm assuming everyone who's listening to this episode knows at this point that there was a mid-credit scene. If you haven't, go back and watch the episode, then come back to the podcast.
Yeah, press pause here. Go check that out.
Yeah. And I guess that's going to be the thing now, that the mid-credits scenes come in around like the second to last or the last episode of the series. And, what we saw was, I think, a plot point that a lot of people knew was coming, that John Walker was going to open up his own Etsy shop. He's obviously going to be building branded Captain America shields with his incredible number of medals imprinted into each one.
The blood of his medals will forge the shield.
You built me. That's his tagline. John Walker Shields, you built me. So my question for you is, what are you buying, if anything, from John Walker's Etsy shop?
Well, that's a loaded question to ask a white man, Jesse. No,
that's why I'm asking you.
No, look, metal yard art is a big trade on Etsy, and I feel like John Walker is clearly into metal sculpture. Now, I live in Philly, so I have no front yard, Jesse. I have a row home on a sidewalk. But if I did, and I xeriscaped it, I could theoretically be into metal yard art. Here's the problem. I do think John Walker might be good at metal yard art, but it would be a bunch of nationalist patriot shit, right? It would be like the Twin Towers Memorial, or Reagan holding a baby wrapped in an American flag with like the Virgin Mary looking on. No, thank you.
I feel, what if he's secretly a phenomenal artist? Once he gets past his initial I am Captain America phase, what if he does stuff that's mind-blowing?
But the problem is, what interests him as subject matter is at best boring, at worst super offensive.
Right.
Where do you go from that, from an art perspective?
And as we saw, everything just randomly going to have a Medal of Honor in it for no apparent reason.
We haven't tied this back to NFTs, but it is sitting right there to be like, here's an NFT of my Medal of Honor that I also soaked in my own blood, or some shit like that.
Yeah. And to bring it back to some themes that we've been discussing in prior weeks, part of what it made me think about was, in the real world, again, if you had somebody like John Walker, this nationalist guy who had a position of power, had it stripped away from him because he blatantly abused it. We saw a lot of this the past 4 years, and we saw what happens when those people get taken out of the position of official power that they were in. Mm-hmm. They set up a GoFundMe, or they start some other grift.
They do.
And it was one of the things about the show, and it felt like maybe the biggest break from reality in a show where a black man with mechanical wings talked to another semi-immortal Captain America with super soldier serum. And then he had a magic shield pitch and catch session with his other friend, who's also a semi-immortal super soldier with a mechanical vibranium arm.
Yeah.
But the thing about this episode that actually hit sort of not necessarily the most unrealistic, but the furthest divorce from reality, was that in the real world, John Walker wouldn't be a pariah. John Walker would be a guy who was on a cable news network, 6 times a week. A guy who could start up his own newsletter or whatever it may be and immediately be making $1 million a year, just regaling people with his boring stories of being Captain America, or talking about his time in Afghanistan, or whatever it is. Even making money off of Lamar's memory. These are all things that in the real world he would do. He would be a multimillionaire within days of having been stripped of being Captain America. And it's actually mind-boggling to think about the fact that one of the plot points that can be most divorced from our current reality is that when you do something horrific in a position of power, your resentment and your bitterness turns inward instead of turning outward and turning into this sort of profit-generating enterprise that we see over and over again.
You're exactly right. We've talked before about how they've still struggled a little bit to point the finger at proper white privilege. They still haven't said the word white when talking to anybody in the same way that they're comfortable saying the word black. And so, I don't know, is the show pulling its punches on white people, do you think, a little bit still?
I do, and we'll get into this. I think some of our later questions get into this some more, but I do. I think part of it is that the conversation the show wants to have, I think, is embodied in the conversation between Isaiah and Sam at Isaiah's house. It is a conversation solely between two black people. There is no white intermediary. There is no white interference in that conversation. It is a conversation between two people about their lived experiences and their understanding of what it means in this world to be a central critical icon. And so I think the show, maybe just given the limited amount of space it has, it doesn't necessarily want that. Is it the best choice? You can make an argument both ways, but I think it is a conscious choice on the part of the show that it sparks the kind of conversations we have here. Mm-hmm. And whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. But I do appreciate that it gives us room to have these conversations instead of just setting down the marker and saying, this is what it means from both a white perspective and a black perspective for this series of events to have occurred.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Well, I think we're going to be getting into more of this later on. These are some themes that we've kind of discussed via text over the past few days.
Indeed.
But to kind of keep it lighter, especially since you've kind of copped out of buying anything off John Walker's Etsy.
I did.
Off of helping an American patriot recover from having his pension stripped from him, Mark.
Which, as you've told us, is an extremely realistic outcome for John Walker.
Right. So what other entertaining questions do you have?
I do have one thing that I really, truly can't stop thinking about, Jesse, and it is, how did the Wakandans get Sam's fingerprint?
So here's my thought on that. I have to figure that Sam, between being in the military, being an Avenger under the Sokovia Accords, his fingerprint is probably in 5,000 government databases, and the Wakandans could break into that in 5 seconds and get a fingerprint. That's the only way I could think of it. Because otherwise, there's a whole lot of creepy stuff going on down at Sam's house between what Carly did to Sarah and what the Wakandans may have done. Like, everybody's in and out of that house all the time.
So I do enjoy the idea of an Ant-Man style scene where they are scanning Bucky's metal arm for a single Sam fingerprint, and then they have to, heat the glue and put it in the little ring, and then put that on Bucky's arm, heat Bucky's arm for 10 minutes, and then pull off the glue and have Sam's fingerprint.
Amazing.
I do kind of like that idea. No, but I also think, yes, Sam definitely has a fingerprint in a government database somewhere, because surely there's a fingerprint scanner he's got to walk up to at some point. And I'm sure that Wakandans can just hack that shit. It's obviously just there for style and fun, but it is one of those things that raises some interesting and troubling questions.
Yeah, and I know I kind of always think of the Wakandans like they're about as close as you get to just perfectly acceptable techno magic in the MCU,
right?
Where anybody else, you're just kind of like, okay, you have to explain that. You got to walk me through how Iron Man's suit is now made of nanites or whatever else is going on. The Wakandans, it's like, it's Wakanda. They can do whatever they want.
And we talked on Character Cast about how they're probably post-carceral, which is why they have to hand Zemo off to the raft, because they don't engage in carceral punishment. So I also want to give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the surveillance state. It's just that without an answer, my paranoid brain goes to dark places, even for a government as advanced as Wakanda.
Mm-hmm.
So give me another question you got for us.
Okay. One of my favorite little scenes was when Sam and Bucky were throwing the shield back and forth, catching on their arm, bouncing it back. It's a very good take on the old, tossing the old pigskin around or throwing the baseball or whatever, sports related bonding thing that men do in movies. But I still, to this day, don't understand how catching the shield on your arm actually works. Because as I understand it, it's a light shield, and how it stays on your arm, there are 2 straps. And so every single time you catch it, you have to position your arm exactly right so that the shield that's going at conservatively 30 miles an hour?
Yeah, a baseball can go 100, so that thing's got to be at least 40 or 50. But sure, let's say 30 conservatively.
Right. So you have to position your arm exactly right at the right angle so that the straps don't flay the skin off your arm. But also, it's on your arm so tightly that when they have to get it off of John Walker's arm, Thanos style, they break his arm. So I just want to know how it works. That's, again, how we were talking, how the Wakandans have techno magic, and I'm just completely fine. If the Wakandans do it and they say it works, I believe it. The shield, I'm I need a little bit more on that.
The good news, Jesse, is it's made from vibranium, which comes from Wakanda. So maybe we can extend the same qualities to the shield that we do to other Wakandan tech. For all we know, vibranium comes from another dimension. Yeah, it came from an asteroid, but who knows in the MCU what that means? Maybe it literally has different properties of inertia. Like it could be stopped and started a little more easily in when it's in motion. I have no idea. Here's my real concern with trying to make up some convoluted vibranium-based defense of the shield. I am pretty sure John Walker's stupid tin can is also going to work the same way next week. And that's going to blow a hole in any attempted defense of the shield physics, because there's no way his homegrown bullshit should work at all.
No. But here's my theory. I think the show was smart enough to do this. They might not do this, in which case I never said this, and it's not anything you can hold against me.
Fair.
But if you look at how John Walker fights with the shield, and this gets into something that we talked about, I think, an episode or two ago, that his fighting style with the shield is not like Steve Rogers, and it's not what Sam was practicing. When Steve used the shield and when Sam was practicing with it, the shield was a projectile. It didn't actually function like a shield functions. Like it might protect you from things in the moment, but what you're doing is you're flinging it at people. It's almost always away from your body when you're using it at its best, when you're using it at its most efficient. John Walker's the exact opposite. If you look at the way he used a shield in the fight with Sam and Bucky the entire time, actually, really other than when he saved Lamar, the shield's always been a bludgeon. It's always actually been used like a shield has been used, where it's always close to your body. You never let it go. And the worst thing you can do is ever take it away from your body and out of your grip. And I realize the more I say this, the more I sound like a guy who like does really bad medieval history on YouTube. I'm not.
No, lean into this personality, Jesse. This is your new future.
Yeah. Based on the extensive study I've done of nothing.
It's time to leave the law and go into medieval cosplay.
Oh, man. But if John Walker's fighting style is to always hold on to his shield and to use it to protect him and to hit people with it, I think that he may actually be making a shield that fits him and how he wants to use the shield rather than how Steve or Sam would use the shield. In which case, it's another little subtle character touch that really helps build him as somebody who's not only distant from the Captain America legacy, but was never going to do the same thing that Sam was.
I love the idea of him making a more brutal shield. That's really cool. For some reason in my mind, I remember in the Winter Soldier movie, it felt like magnets were more involved in the shield. Do I have that right?
It did. And the reason was I always thought that how it came back was that it like attached to Steve's arm, like his gauntlet. Yeah. And then he could always like flip it on his back and it would just hold there.
Right.
And clearly he's not like strapping it in every time.
No, I thought it was magnets on his arm and magnets on his back. And that was kind of how it slowed down and started up because it would. And obviously, again, technically the inertia would yank his arm out of the socket or whatever. He's a super soldier.
Right.
It's vibranium. Somewhere in there, I can excuse it all. But I did think magnets were involved. And maybe they either don't care about that or lost sight of that because I definitely looked and Sam's just in a sweatshirt kicking that shield around in the backyard.
I know. And maybe they saw the trailer for Fast 9 and they realized like we can't do magnets anymore. That movie's got it on lock.
Yeah, magnets are the cinematic property of somebody else. It's like Spider-Man's rights now. You just have to fight over who can do magnets. All right. I want to ask you about a particular Baron who seemed to believe he was going to die when Bucky showed up. Zemo seemed even weirder, at peace with that idea, that he was ready to go, which he also was at the end of Civil War, admittedly. I talked with Christine about why I thought maybe he was ready to die. But my question for you, for PonderVision, is what the hell do you think was on Zemo's bucket list? And did he get any of it done between episodes?
So thinking about what we know about Baron Zemo, between the creepy purple mask, the cars, and the aforementioned Fast 9, I think he probably just like entered himself into some underground European drag races. Just like, you know, won everything because he was no longer at fear for his life or he no longer cared if he lived or died. Probably based on what we know, drank some incredibly expensive scotch. Mm-hmm. Was it scotch or bourbon? I couldn't tell.
I think it was scotch. I'm feeling like it was scotch, but maybe it was whiskey.
And that seems like a pretty, you know, stereotypical European supervillain move. Like,
for sure.
You're fine scotch. And then obviously, you know, go back, visit Sokovia, maybe see what's going on in the various splinter countries like Latveria. We might hear that Baron Zemo stopped by there.
Founding Latveria would be an awesome bucket list item.
I know. What about you?
I was also thinking about his cars, and I was looking around for what rich people might buy if they had unlimited money. And believe it or not, Jesse, Aston Martin is building a $4 million submarine. And I do think buying and piloting that might be on the Zemo bucket list, but they are not made yet. And so I think we've also discussed on this podcast that manufacturing is actually behind in the MCU because of the snap and the lack of resources. So I do not think he can get his Aston Martin submarine. I do have one more idea, though.
Go for it.
Now, what does he miss most in the world, Jesse?
His wife and his child.
Wouldn't it be nice if there was a certain red demon that you could go to make a deal to get your family back? Now, I'm not saying this happened, but what if he made a deal with Mephisto to get his family back? Because, number one, it would explain why he is so calm and suddenly off his vengeance train, because he made a deal. The family's coming back. Mephisto's going to break him out of the raft. It's all going to come together. Number two, if you were Mephisto, would you not seek this guy out right away? Is he not the easiest mark for a deal?
Oh, man. What I love about this is that we're now entering into territory where anything you ever want to explain about any part of a Marvel movie or show, just like Mephisto in the background.
I'm trying to limit myself to every 2 weeks on one show. That's my Mephisto limit. So you're bearing the brunt of this one. I thought this was a pretty credible bucket list area, but obviously not. But also yes, but definitely not. But yes, also yes.
But no. But I do like it as like a character-driven moment.
Right. I can say with confidence, if Mephisto had been introduced into this universe, I think this would actually make a lot of sense. Like if he knew, he does not know that Mephisto exists, though Mephisto should know that he exists and go after him. But I do think since he doesn't know, obviously this didn't happen, but if he did know about Mephisto, you can bet Zemo would be willing to trade an eternity in hell for another 30 years with his family. That's how obsessed he is with them.
Oh, completely. Also, we don't know yet what happened to that cell phone message, right? The one that he kept listening to over and over again.
Oh, no, he deleted it at the end of Civil War, I think, when he thought he was going to kill himself. Yeah.
You're right.
So maybe he wants that back, too. Mephisto can throw that in as a little bonus. All right, I just have one more entertaining question for you. Are Sarah and Bucky a good match, Jesse?
You mean Mr. and Mrs. Sarah Wilson?
That is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes. I don't know. And the problem is we don't know enough yet about Sarah, one, to know if she's really into it. Like, we've talked about this before, as is everyone who's ever seen Sebastian Stan or Bucky. But like, he shows up, you're going to be into it. Like,
you're going to be into it.
You're just going to be like, okay. Also, how wonderful is it from just like an appreciating beautiful people standpoint that they decided that the two best friends in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the relationship that was going to last the longest to be the most enduring, was Chris Evans and Sebastian Stan. Like, just two guys who you're like, okay, you show up, like, they're on the list, you get a hall pass, whatever.
Yeah, they definitely are both beautiful and very kind people on the main. So Marvel cast both of those extremely well. I talked about my thoughts on this relationship on Character Cast, but I do think Sarah's got an old school vibe that fits Bucky's lifestyle. She's all about working hard, fixing up the house, handling the kids. Bucky would not have to deal with any stupid internet-related shit. He would not have to go to brunch. He would not have to have modern relationship conversations that sound like fucking therapy. None of that shit. And so I do think there's a lot there. Now, they're probably pretty far apart on music and TV and shit like that.
Yeah.
But they also like their own space, and they probably don't need each other 24/7 doting on one another. They can have their own thing going on, happy together, but apart a lot of the time too. So I don't know. I love it for them, but that's just me.
I mean, I also got to say, as a stepdad, like, you know, being able to pull off your arm and let your stepkids play with your, you know, $40 billion cybernetic arm whenever they're just getting on your nerves. That's a pretty good trick.
Yeah, but the first time the older one hits the younger one with it, intentionally or not, it's going to be a whole situation.
Oh, man. And then Aya's going to show up again, and it's just going to be a thing.
How old in your household, Jesse, would a kid have to be allowed to play with a cybernetic vibranium arm?
Oh. Now, by themselves or with their sibling?
I don't know. Are there different rules for that? You're the parent. You tell me.
I mean, presumably, like if you're playing with it by yourself, just with kids, the model that I see by yourself, you would like be looking at it and you would like make up handshakes with it. You would just play with it differently. Whereas like if you do have a younger sibling, the first thing I'm going to do is just pretend I'm the Winter Soldier. Like I'll just pretend it's my arm and I'll, try to hit you with it or whatever. And then a kid's got a vibranium fist to the head and you have to explain that whole thing.
But maybe then they get a vibranium patch on their skull and you build a whole new cyborg child. I don't know, just spitballing.
So I would say kid by themselves, like 10, 11 years old.
Okay.
Also, the question is, I don't know how much the arm weighs because it's much like the shield. The shield could weigh anywhere from like 3 pounds to 20 pounds.
Yeah, vibranium, again, it's a mystery.
Right. And so is that arm like, is it the size of an arm made of flesh and bone, or the weight of an arm made of flesh and bone? Is it like a 25-pound arm? Or is it actually, 1.5 pounds and you can just pick it up anytime you want it? I think that also has a lot that plays in a lot.
I'm that old motherfucker who still can't believe how light running shoes are now. Whenever I put on a pair of running shoes, I'm like, they're air. It's ridiculous. And I think back to all the sneakers I've owned in my life that are, 4 pounds or whatever. And I didn't even know they were heavy. But apparently you can make sneakers that are lighter than air. God only knows what you can do with vibranium.
Right. But I would say if there's 2 kids playing with it and the likelihood is that at some point somebody's going to try to pretend to be the Winter Soldier, I think both kids have to be at least 11, 12 years old.
Okay. I still think that's pretty permissive, but I, again, have no experience in the parenting realm, so I defer to your judgment.
Again, it's kids play with objects all the time that they can hit each other with.
That's true.
So it's more just the fact that, one, it costs so much money. And it's just, I don't know what the properties of this are. It's like, it's the difference between what I let my kids play with a shovel together. No, because like somebody's going to end up with a gash in their head.
But like there are chairs in the house at any given time, right? And a chair could just as easily be a weapon as the arm.
Exactly. But then you also sit on it. There's other modes of play with it.
Right.
So yeah, I need to know more about this arm before I give my sign off.
Well, this is the perfect place to leave our entertaining questions and get into our meta questions. I want to ask you one first, Jesse. The actor Elijah Richardson plays Eli Bradley. And I do wonder, how annoyed do you think he was out of all of the takes they probably have of Sam walking away from him on the street, that they used the one where he airballed the shot?
So I had to go back and watch this after you raised this question, and it's right there. Just airballed it. Now, I have to say, if he weren't going to come back, I think, not that bad. But what we do know is that he is going to be coming back as a young Avenger, which means that whatever age he is now, he's probably locked into the Marvel universe for 10 years, maybe longer. That is going to come up every single time. It's always going to be like, you remember when you airballed that shot in that scene with Sam? Like that was your last shot before you came back as an Avenger. And so I got to think like people will be looking back at that, paying attention to what he did. I gotta think he's just annoyed with it, but also I hope he's got a good sense of humor about it, especially given the fact that he's probably going to be a millionaire based off of that airball shot.
Think about actors getting a break in the MCU. It is huge pressure. The few scenes that you are going to be in are going to be watched by millions of people. And you know who else is going to be in that audience, Jesse? Every single casting director who ever was or ever will be employed. So it would suck to worry that missing that shot cost you a role in a sports movie. The pressure of everything that is involved with having your major break in an MCU show feels like it would be overwhelming. I cannot imagine it. He is clearly a stronger person than I am.
I never thought about it that way, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, every single frame of your footage is going to be torn apart, memed, overanalyzed by fans and super fans, idiot haters, everybody.
Right. And I mean, what I would hope is, one, that his role in the MCU gives him enough credibility and so that when it comes time for him to start trying out for movies, the thing about being an MCU actor, based on mine not actually being one or knowing a whole lot about it, but you do have at least look, the entire point of the show is that we don't know a lot about anything we're saying.
Hey, we're pondering stuff. We're not,
But you also do have the security of being able to go back to, like, absent him doing something that would disqualify him, doing something awful on social media, he's got that role locked down going forward. Because,
absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Unless your name is Terrence Howard, you are going to be back for every sequel.
Or Abby Ryder-Fortson, poor Abby. That's Cassie Lang, who had to get aged up because of the blip, and we lost her, and she was really good. So it does happen, and she's also going to be a Young Avenger, probably. Spoiler alert. But yes, on the whole, Eli Bradley, they clearly cast him, and if they're going to bring him forward into Young Avengers, it's definitely going to be Elijah Richardson.
Yeah, I don't know. It's also, again, I don't know why I'm talking about Fast and Furious so much.
It's on your mind.
It is. I mean, the trailer came out this week. It's all I can think about.
I have tunnel vision for the MCU, baby, but I appreciate your breadth of blockbuster franchises.
I keep calling my son Dom all the time, talking about family.
Sounds healthy.
But do you know about the rule that the main actors in the Fast and Furious franchise have? None of them can ever look bad on camera.
Oh.
So it's that idea, but taken like to an extreme. If you ever watch a Fast and Furious movie and look at the fights, the good guys, the main good guys, they rarely, if ever, even get punched, let alone look like they're at risk of losing any fight that's not with the main bad guy. There's never a moment of weakness. They all just get their shot. They get their machismo. At most, they play off of each other.
Mm-hmm.
But there's never a scene where one has to or is made to look weak, which the fact that it's lasted 9 movies, now 10, I guess, with Hobbs and Shaw. But the fact that it's lasted 10 movies with the main characters never looking weak once is a testament to whatever that franchise offers to the world, because it's just beautiful to watch, I guess. But I also don't know if necessarily that's what audiences are looking for in everything.
Agreed.
Even in the MCU, I mean, it's a superhero franchise, and the superheroes at the end of the day will come back and win. But it also did something that I think would have been completely alien to superhero movies even 15 years ago, which is that they filmed an entire movie, Infinity War, where the heroes lose, and they lose as convincingly as possible to the point where many of them die. And so hopefully that's kind of changed our idea in a blockbuster concept of the fact that, maybe actors can be made to look a little more human, even when they're supposed to be these bigger than life heroes.
I love that thought. That's a very heartwarming and positive take on something that I was actually just feeling really bad for the guy about. And now maybe I'm hoping that everyone will be a little bit chill about it. So Elijah, I'm sorry I even brought it up at all in the first place. I did not mean to call attention to it. It made me worried for you, and I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, and maybe Anthony Mackie can write him a note just saying, like, look, we did that scene 15 times. He nailed it 14 times. It was just me. I looked the best in the one where he missed it.
I have to say, I do still think, though, if they had any other option, they should have used it. So I'm just going to assume that's the only real great take they had for whatever reason.
Yeah. And it may have even been, it was one of those scenes that was impacted by COVID. Like,
oh, sure.
Yeah, they just couldn't get back to film it again. Okay. Now, I want to go a little bit deeper on the Isaiah and Sam conversation. The show has a lot of villains, but the villains that we get on screen, the tangible villains, almost to a person avoid race. And to the extent that they ever do grapple with race, and if we look at all the bad guys on the show, they are all Caucasian, they're all white. But Zemo has some actual enlightened takes about race. The Flag Smashers are not really focused on race at all. They're focused on national borders. They're focused on resource allocation more so than racial or ethnic division. And even John Walker, they've toned down so many of the right-wing nationalist aspects of his character in the comics, even to the point where they consciously surround Walker with black supporting characters to kind of take away the conflict that could come between a black man who should be Captain America and the white man who is Captain America, making it a lot more about ideology and approach than about race. But if we look at how this episode in particular, and in many ways how this series has approached race, the primary conversation in this episode was between 2 black men. And in many ways, it was one older black man with more experience telling a younger black man about how he approached life, how he perceived things, and the younger black man listening. And so because the debate over whether a black man can be Captain America in many ways was never had between a black character and a white character. Bucky was kind of a stand-in, but Bucky also was not the person who made any of those decisions, and he wasn't necessarily fighting one way or the other.
Right.
Does it help or hurt the audience, the perception, the uptake of those themes and the resolution of that conflict regarding whether a black person could be capped to have kept that conversation so tightly between black characters?
Well, I can only tell you my experience as a cis white guy watching that conversation. Obviously, my heart broke for both of them. The benefit I see from this approach is that by removing the white perspective in that conversation, I think it makes it hard for white people to take sides or quibble with a specific line. Instead, we are taken inside of a conversation that some, and I don't know, maybe a lot of white people have never seen before between two generations of black men, like you're saying, about what it has been like, is like, and will be like to live in America. White people who already have decided that there's no such thing as racial oppression or systemic racism, there's nothing to be done for them. But for the white people who are not already hardened against the ideas the show is putting forth, I think this was a better way to crack open their perspective than to pit a white and a black character in that conversation, where again, the white lens might get clouded by trying to personally identify with the white character consciously or subconsciously. Does that, but that's just, again, my perspective watching that as a white guy. What did you think?
I agree with it. And one thing I want to add to it is that in a superhero show, one of the primary methods of communication is physical. It is fighting somebody. It is standing in victory or in defeat. And if you look at the way this show has positioned Sam with respect to all those villains and his friends, anyone in this series who is white, there is always some ability to have a physical confrontation or the possibility of that physical confrontation. There's no way that Sam can have a conversation with John Walker about whether a black man can be Captain America without it potentially coming to blows and potentially someone's life being on the line.
Yeah.
You cannot have that conversation with Baron Zemo because A, you do not trust him, but B, you fought him before and he is a killer. Sam will do what he needs to protect himself. Same thing with the Flag Smashers. The only way I think you could have had this conversation is between him and Isaiah Bradley, a man who, although he had the ability, if need be, could still fight, protect himself. He could enter into a physical conflict if need be. Based on how that scene was written and how their relationship has been built so far, even in the few scenes they've had together, there's not going to be a physical confrontation. Sam is not there to fight him. Sam is there to do something he thinks will honor him. And Isaiah needs to share with him why he's not honored by that. And it's not Sam's fault. It gets to America. It gets to the history of race. It gets to the particular set of events that have occurred to Isaiah. But if you'd had that scene and if you'd had that discussion and that revelation with Sam and I think any white character on the show, the dynamics of it would be so fundamentally different that I don't think you could get the point across. And that's where that same conversation would fall into the trap of, as we've discussed before, the woke wars of cancel culture and anti-racism and everything else. By taking any white voice out of that scene, it actually, I hope, helped a white audience listen to what was being said instead of who it was being said to or who it was being said by.
I do too, and I think it did, at least from this white person's perspective. I had one other thought on this that I definitely want to hear what you think about. If Isaiah had not said it to Sam, I think a lot of people on Twitter would, which is that no self-respecting black man would take on the Captain America mantle because America is unsalvageably hateful towards you. And I think by having Sam confront that from an unassailable position, and I mean unassailable, because Isaiah is 100% right from his perspective, and Sam agrees and says as much to Sarah. But the fact that Sam hears all of that and still works through it, I think makes his choice 1,000 times stronger. Because even if you side with Isaiah, even if you feel like it's the wrong choice, I feel like at a minimum, it makes it impossible to call Sam's decision pat or to say that he didn't wrestle with the difficult truths, and that by extension, the show and the showrunners didn't wrestle with those difficult truths before putting this together.
I don't know who coined this saying, but I love it and I don't want to take credit for it. If you look at voting rates, Black people, especially Black women, tend to actually vote at the highest rates in America, or some of the highest rates. And I've always believed that the motivation behind that, this is the thing I'm stealing from someone, and if anyone out there knows who it is, please give them credit for it. Nobody believes in the promise of what America should be more than Black people, and no one understands the failure of what America has been more than Black people. And without Sam coming to terms with that, it would have either been something he was pressured into by Steve and by Bucky, or something that he did without that conscious thought. And the fact that, again, as you said, he had that conversation, he thought about it, he worked, he did what he was supposed to do to make the decision his, as opposed to someone else's, or even just the decision that had to be made based on the situation. It makes whatever he ends up doing more powerful. And one of the things we still don't know yet is we don't know what's in that Wakandan suitcase. We don't know what his ultimate decision is going to be. Could he be the Falcon with Captain America's shield? Could he be someone else entirely? He doesn't necessarily have to take over the mantle of Captain America to be who Steve thought he should be.
Well, in case this wasn't uncomfortable enough, folks, let's get into our uncomfortable questions. Jesse, I want to begin with this. There was a tweet going around over the weekend that said, and it was quoting the show, "They'll never let a Black man be Captain America." And then it showed a pic of Rhodey popping out of the Iron Patriot suit. Last I checked on Sunday night, this dude was still crowing about how nobody could explain the difference. Jesse, would you like to help this guy out?
Okay. So, I mean, the first question is Rhodey still Iron Patriot?
The answer is no.
The answer is no. And all you really have to do is watch Iron Man 3 to understand why. Iron Patriot was never meant to be Captain America. Iron Patriot was meant to take the Iron Man suit and take the only aspect of it that the U.S. government had firm control over and slap an American flag on it.
Yes.
It was a marketing ploy. It wasn't Captain America.
It was cynical as hell, man. And the movie knew it. Like, the movie was making that point.
Yes. And again, we saw this through the 3 Iron Man movies, that as Iron Man becomes a fixture, as people understand what Iron Man is and look at just the capabilities of the suit, every nation on Earth is going to try to grab a little bit of it for themselves, to rebuild it, to repurpose it, do whatever. America just happened to have someone who was enlisted, whom they still had control over, and who they could put in an Iron Man suit with their effectively the American logo on it. Like, that's not Captain America. It's just impossible for me to think that you watch Iron Man 3 and you watch this show, and what you think Captain America is someone in a suit that has the American flag on it.
I also think when you spend your time treating conversations about race like it's a high school debate class, you have to know at some level that you're full of shit. Because this is not about the line by line, and trying to play gotcha with an out of context gif of Rhodey in an American flag Iron Man outfit is the classic version of that. It's a quibble with bad faith at the heart of it, and you're just obviously not listening to people because he has many hundreds of people telling him why he's wrong, and he's still out there crowing about not getting it. You know, it's about how you approach these conversations. I'm sure I have and will continue to make lots of mistakes as we muddle our way through, as a white person muddling their way through these conversations and unpacking all of our privilege and all the systemic problems that we're dealing with. But you have to approach it from a position of good faith. And this guy was not. And anytime you see somebody like that, I feel like the best thing to do is, just dunk on them and move on.
Exactly. And now I hate to move us off of somebody being wrong on Twitter, but let's move on to somebody being wrong on the show.
Okay.
This was the first episode where anyone pierced the veil of Steve's perfection. What we've heard up until this episode is that Steve was unique among men, that there's nobody else in the world who could have been Captain America because of his judgment, his restraint, his understanding. And in many ways, that's right. I think as the show has been built, he is a character who was unique precisely because he was the right person to be Captain America before he ever took the serum. And as Lamar said, the serum only built up who he was. It only gave light to his inner character. But we talk a lot. The last question we had, the last couple of questions we've had have been about the impact of a black man being Captain America. Steve gave the shield to Sam. And the way that scene read at the end of Endgame was, you'll take the shield, you'll be Captain America. Thanks very much. I'm going to go be an old man now.
Right. He says, it's the quote they play at the very beginning of this series. It doesn't feel like it's mine, or it feels like it's somebody else's. Well, it isn't. And that's all Steve has to say about it.
Right.
He just fiats that this should be no problem.
But Bucky admits that neither he nor Steve understood the difficulty that a black man would have being Captain America. And that difficulty is not about the suit or the shield. It's not about living up to Steve Rogers' example. It is about something endemic to America itself. The idea that when a black person takes over an icon, when a black person takes over something that is symbolic, that they will be attacked for it. They will be denigrated for it. That it will become, quote unquote, affirmative action or unearned or unjustified. That is something that is not only endemic to America itself, but even if you wanted to give Steve the benefit of the doubt that he basically disappeared between World War II and 2011, give or take. And then after he was reborn, he was thrust into this Avengers world where he wasn't really down to earth, dealing with or understanding day-to-day racial dynamics in America. He then went back in time to the 40s and lived life as a straight white man up until 2023. He understood it. He knew it. And if he didn't, he was not paying attention. Isn't not understanding America a huge, huge flaw in a man who calls himself Captain America?
Yes. And I'm open to the argument that Steve Rogers was never a fair or just choice for Captain America. However, I do think he was an accurate one for his time, because American monoculture was white, proud, and ignorant. Even his white liberal contemporaries would have been at least as blind as Steve as to why a black man might face an uphill battle to be Captain America. And I do think, like Steve, they wouldn't have even known how to ask the question. 20 years ago, I'm not sure I would have understood how to ask this question and internalize and wrestle with this question. I'm not proud of that, but I also can't bury it because I've made what I hope is some amount of progress. I do think Steve could also have made progress, but like you said, he went back to a time that was more unjust, where black people were made more invisible and were more structurally oppressed. So the thing I wonder is, and what I wonder what you think about it is, what does it say about Steve that he chose to do that? Because like what you're saying, I mean, functionally, imagine all the times he would have had to nod his way through the casual racism from Peggy's neighbors or his new drinking buddies or whatever. Clearly, he could not have engaged with black oppression in the past, or he would have had a better conversation with Sam, right?
Right. And I can only think of one of two things. The first is that Steve assumed that Sam would be able to deal with whatever issues the mantle brought because he believed that the mantle superseded those concerns. That Captain America was something bigger than even the legacy of America, that it stood above racism, sexism, any of the numerous forms of oppression that have been prevalent in American history, which seems incredibly egotistical to just sit there and say, like, look, Captain America is kind of a bigger deal than the transatlantic slave trade or Jim Crow or even the post-civil rights era rollback of civil rights. That you can just take the shield and you're strong enough to deal with it. That is a lot to place on one person. The other alternative thought I have is that when he handed over that shield, and this is why I also have some doubts about whether Sam will take up being Captain America or if instead he'll be the Falcon and have the shield, is that Sam was the person who was worthiest of having the shield and of wielding whatever legacy specifically came with Captain America, however he chose to do it. And we've always assumed throughout this show, and I think the government of the show, the U.S. government of the show, and John Walker have always been of the opinion that Captain America is a thing that belongs to the government, or it is a mantle that can be passed on. And so we have to find the person who will best fit our idea of it and give it to them. But what if we reject that altogether? What if Steve rejected that altogether and he said, the thing is, the shield is one of the most remarkable pieces of technology in the world, apparently, because we can't explain how it works.
Right.
But the person who I trust to have it and to not abuse the power and the symbolism that comes along with it is you. And so you still be the Falcon, but also here's a shield.
Totally.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, look, this was a great conversation. Jesse, where can people find and follow you for more of it?
You can find me on Twitter at Jesse L. Taylor, all one word. And I promise you that I was not the person who tweeted that the one black person in an American flag outfit was the same as the other black person in an American flag outfit.
You were definitely not that clown. So, legendary listeners, that is our show for today. The Marvelous TV Club has a ton more in store for you to finish out Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Subscribe if you haven't. Tell a friend. If you feel like leaving a 5-star review on Apple, that really helps us with all those frustrating algorithms out there. And the rating has a huge impact on our ability to be discovered, so we really appreciate it. Until then, you can call me Val, but don't actually call me Val. Just keep it in your head.